Okay, well, we have Lawrence Wells with us today, and he is a contributor for Literary Traveler, and he's also an author. And Lawrence, why don't you tell us about your upcoming book that's going to be published next week?
My book is called In Faulkner's Shadow, a Memoir, and it's about my 38-year marriage to Dean Faulkner, who was the niece of William Faulkner, and our life together here in Oxford, Mississippi. And it's also about how Oxford evolved, came out from under Faulkner's shadow and became a community of writers, all of whom appreciate Faulkner and were enriched by his presence and his example.
Wow, that sounds great. Now, tell us a little bit more about your connection to the family. Tell us about Dean and how all that kind of came to be.
Okay, Dean and I met in graduate school at the University of Mississippi, and we began dating about a year after that, and we got married in 1972. But it wasn't easy. We were trying to make up our mind one night whether to get married, and we just couldn't come to a decision. We were sitting on our front steps till midnight, and I went home, and at 3 o'clock I was awakened by a presence in my bedroom. And I looked at the window, and there was Faulkner's face, William Faulkner's face,
Really?
his clear photograph looking at me, mano a mano,
Wow.
those, those dark brown eyes of his staring into my soul, right? I was strangely not uncomfortable with his presence. I didn't know what it was about, but I didn't feel startled or afraid. The next day I saw Dean on campus, and I said, I think I saw your uncle last night. And she said, was it at 3 o'clock? Because at 3 o'clock, at the same moment that I saw his face at the window, she smelled his pipe smoke.
Really?
Got out of bed, and it was a Dunhill brand. He smoked Dunhill. And she would recognize that when she was a child, she used to roll her own, steal his tobacco and roll her own. And so she followed that pipe smoke down the hall to the dining room. And she turned on the light. Of course, he wasn't there, and there was no smoke visible, but she still smelled it. So we had to decide what this visitation meant. Was it real, or was it something that we both imagined? And even if we both imagined his visit, the fact that we did it at the same time, completely separate, half a mile apart, and 3 o'clock in the morning meant that we were connected mortally. That's the way we saw it.
Wow. Wow. That is interesting. Now, where you tell us where you live.
Okay, I live, and you can see behind me here the wall, the books, the home of William Faulkner's mother, Maud Butler Faulkner, who was my wife's grandmother. And my wife inherited the house. And when she passed away, Dean passed away in 2011, I continued to reside in the house. And she has children, and her children are happy for me to be here. It's only 3 blocks from the courthouse of Oxford, Mississippi, so we might hear some traffic noise out here.
Right. It's right downtown. And so that's the house where William Faulkner grew up.
Well, no, it's his mother's house. It was built in 1931. He was born in 1897
Okay.
in New York, Mississippi, and they moved here. And this house was built after he was 34 years old.
Oh,
So
okay.
he used to walk up here almost every day to visit his mother. And they would sit on the front porch in rocking chairs and gossip about the people who were walking past. They'd wave at them and say, hey, how you doing? And then they would whisper to each other, he's a cad, or we know what he's up to.
Yeah.
Anyway, his mother was his strongest literary ally and critic. He loved everything she said. She instinctively understood his writing.
So she was in some ways a great influence on him as a writer.
He has several little old ladies in his novels who are based on her. They were always women of courage and unshakable resolve.
And so you lived, when you first got married, you lived in the house with Maud. Is that correct?
I've never lived anywhere else since we got married.
Oh, wow.
That was in 1972. So
Okay.
I'm an antique in the house.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Maud? I know that she had a saying that was placed over one of the doorways, I think, was it
Yeah,
in the house?
oh, yeah, that sign has had a huge effect on me and on Dean on her children. Um, the sign read, "Don't complain, don't explain." And that was Miss Maud's mantra. And it looks good on the surface. It looks reasonable. But when you hope for explanations from people who you're close to and none are forthcoming, you are in the dark. You don't know why they did what they did. And they're not going to tell you either. Anyway, it was funny how that sign and that slogan, that mantra affected everybody in the family. It's funny, it's amusing. And I go into that several times throughout the book of the funny things that happened because of that.
People
Once
did.
our
Go ahead.
house was, our house was struck by lightning in 1976 and set on fire after we'd been married 4 years. The first fireman to arrive on the scene was Larry Brown, who became a famous novelist later. And the children were here with us. We were planning to go to Florida to the beach the next day. And the children disappeared in the confusion. And Dean took one thing out of the house to save, and it was that sign, "Don't complain, don't explain." The local newspaper ran a picture of her the next day holding this sign. She had just been struck by lightning, and she wasn't going to complain.
Right.
Don't.
Right. It's something that she took that, and I imagine there's a lot of important family artifacts in the house.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was a heavy trunk that contained many first editions and letters and uh, memorabilia, and I got a couple of friends to take it out and put it in the car. And as they went out carrying it, each tugging one in, they got into a tug of war in the middle of the street, and the dean of women at Ole Miss blocked traffic while they struggled because one wanted to take it home with him and the other one wanted to save it from any pesky interference. And so that one of them, they owned two competing clothing stores. And I said it was Nelson's department store versus Duval's men's shop, and Nelson's won the tug of war.
Wow. Wow. Um, and so in a way, you are very much a keeper of this legacy of William Faulkner and the family.
Well, in a way, I was not anointed or given the role by Dean or anyone else. It just happened, you
Right.
know. And Dean and I, it just happened that we were in a position to help the editor of Harper's Magazine, Willie Morris, be hired at Ole Miss as writer in residence in 1980. And that started an influx of writers here. The next one to arrive was Barry Hannah, the novelist.
Right.
And gradually, Oxford became a community of writers. It is still Faulkner's town, but they are the new wave. And Dean and I are very much a part of that. So yeah, in a way, we are at the center of Oxford's resurgence and second renaissance. Faulkner's still here with us, but there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, there's a quote about the past. The past is never dead. I think Faulkner said that.
Yeah, the past is never dead. It's not even past.
Not even past.
We're reliving the sins of the past as well as the strengths and the benefits of the past. Both are with us, and they affect our conscious decisions and unconscious decisions all the time, all day long. So in his writing, you will notice that he slips back and forth in time in the same paragraph, sometimes the same sentence.
Right.
And You have to be very discerning to know when he's doing that. He's not trying to trick the reader. He's simply making his point, which is the past is always with us, and we will always be creatures of it and inheritors of it, good or ill.
How was that in terms of helping to build up that community of writers in Oxford? Was it more of a weight to have such a great legacy of Faulkner, or was it something that helped bring people to Oxford?
Well, both. We have a wonderful bookstore here called Square Books. It has been called the best independent bookstore in America, and has won that award several times.
I was
All
there about 20 years ago.
you were.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God, I could have met you then. I'm sorry we didn't get together. Could have given you the family tour, I can tell you that. But the Square Books, it really is the godfather or godmother of the Oxford Renaissance, because immediately every major writer wanted to come here and have a book signing in Faulknerstown. They were all Faulkner freaks, and they wanted to honor the man, and and see his town, and in that sense, Square Books created a constant presence, a literary presence in town, which was pretty fierce because these guys were the top tier of American writers. And the local readers who flocked to these signings were spoiled rotten by these guys. I mean, they've got the best here. Okay, so Oxford is beginning to become a Southern capital, literary capital and cultural capital, and it still is, and will continue to be. The bookstore is still going strong. It's run by Richard and Lisa Howarth. And the writers who stayed, who moved here to write, some of them teach at the University of Mississippi. It's a very close group. We all support each other. I remember one time I took a painter, a friend of mine who is an artist, to meet Winston Groom, who wrote Forrest Gump. And he lived in near Mobile. And the friend was struck by the fact that Winston was so supportive of me and my writing. And we chatted, we were having fun. We had dinner. He made gumbo for us. And so after the dinner, he said, writers are supportive and artists are more competitive. Artists don't help each other and not encouraging each other the way Winston was treating you. So if I'm not making that as a general statement, that was his observation about artists. But writers here are very supportive, and it's a tight group, and that also is part of the hospitality for the other writers who come in. We've given many parties here at this house for the visiting writers. Many, maybe 100, 200, 300, I don't know.
So in a way, then, having that community has been a benefit for you as a writer. It's been a blessing.
Absolutely. My first novel, which was published by Doubleday, came about when I read an article in the Jackson, Mississippi Clarion Ledger about a Civil War roundtable meeting in which one of the members gave a talk about how, as a second lieutenant right out of Mississippi State in the 1930s, he was a host for 5 German military men who came to study a Civil War battlefield called Bryce's Crossroads, where Nathan Bedford Forrest defeated a force 3 times his size by use of the terrain and with his cavalry tactics. Okay, so he thought that Rommel was one of the 5, Erwin Rommel. So whether he was or not, I jumped on it and wrote a novel about it. And in that sense, I'm living off the terrain. I'm gathering, all writers do that. The story I wrote for you for a literary traveler was Alistair MacLeod's Cape Breton, right? and it's in your current issue. So he was an autobiographical writer, considered one of the foremost writers of Canada. And he was from Inverness, a little town in Cape Breton, the island in Nova Scotia, right? And Alistair MacLeod lived off the terrain too. That was his world, and he wrote about it beautifully. And so in that sense, all of us, and we've got maybe 10 novels that have come out in the last maybe 5 or 6 years here by writers here about Oxford and about life in Oxford, about themselves and their experiences. So even though my novel was set in the 1930s and they weren't about my experiences, I went out and researched everything. I went to the battlefield and I asked Dean's permission to cast William Faulkner as a fictional character in my novel because I wanted Rommel to meet him.
Oh, wow.
And so that happens in the novel. And it's interesting because Faulkner takes him home, introduces him to bourbon, and then once Rommel is high, challenges him to a tennis game on his little tennis court behind his house. And Faulkner says, I'm going to play for the writers and poets of Germany, and you can play for the munitions industry. And so anyway, writers are living off the terrain. Alistair MacLeod lived off the terrain. I was drawn to Cape Breton partly because of my experience here with Faulkner and how he wrote about Oxford. And by the way, Alistair MacLeod came here in 2008 and had a book signing at Square Books. Faulkner was one of his idols, and I didn't get to meet him that time. And he had passed away before I went to Cape Breton, but I did meet his son, Alexander MacLeod, who teaches at a college in Halifax, and he's a published author himself. He has a wonderful book of short stories, and he gave me some wonderful insights into his father that I was able to put in the story that you published.
Yeah, that was a great article. And I had a question for you. It's interesting. You talk about living off the terrain. Do you have any advice for writers, because place and setting can be so important and connects to characters? Do you have any advice about that, how they can incorporate that or absorb some of that?
Yeah, you have to be true to your subject, and that's why one of the first rules of writing is write about what you know. You don't want to go too far afield from the rock hard experience that you've had, that you know in your heart is true, and the people that you've met and the characters that you know. Now, writers can base any character on any person they've ever met, and most characters are an amalgam of several different people or character types. That does not mean it's not going to be real, but I'm saying that the reality of those characters comes from what the author knows about those characters. He has to really know his characters, because if every time you write a story or a novel, the reader steps into your world and says, okay, I'm going to trust you, but don't let me down. I'll follow you, but it's got to be real and it's got to be honest. So I think in that sense, that's what, that would be my advice, would be to make sure that you're on top of your material. And one way to do that is to write from your own experience.
Right. That's great advice. Do you have a favorite anecdote from the book that you would want to share?
You mean my book?
Yeah, your
book. Memoir?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a quick story about the first time we introduced Willie Morris to the author Barry Hannah. And Barry Hannah was pretty wild at that point in his life, and he was job hunting at Ole Miss. He had come job hunting and was staying with a friend of ours. And we picked him up and took him over and introduced him to Willie. Now, we had never met Barry before. We were fans of his. He's a wonderful writer. And he had won the American Academy of Arts Prize for his first short story collection, Airships. Esquire magazine published over 30 of his stories over about a 5-year period. He was hot, right? And so the first thing he said to me, he took one look at Dean, who was beautiful, and he said, "I could overpower you and take your woman." At the time, he was holding a knife in his hand. It was hilarious. Dean immediately brightened because that was a compliment. He was flirting with it. And I didn't know what to say to him. And Dean said, "Well, you'll have to fight both of us." And her from that moment forward, he always called her that scrappy Faulkner woman. So we went out to dinner at a roadhouse in a restaurant 6 miles from Oxford. And on the way back, I was driving. Willie was in the front seat talking about Ole Miss football, one of his favorite subjects. And Barry made a pass at Dean in the back seat. Well, they grappled. And Dean used a grip that she had never used, but had been taught to her at her sorority at the University of Mississippi, called the Chi Omega clamp. And that's where you start, as you hold on to it and then grasp the other hand, and he's pretty much harmless then. You've got him neutralized. And she did that with Hannah, and he put his head on her shoulder and pretended to go to sleep, which she thought was hilarious because her children would go to sleep on her shoulder on long trips. He was like a baby. She didn't say a word because she didn't want to jeopardize his chances to get hired at Ole Miss as writer in residence. And she knew that Willie, if he found out about that, he would have gossiped about it and told people that Barry was out of line. And he was out of line, except that, remember, she had told him he'd have to fight both of us.
Right.
He wasn't overpowering me to take my woman. He was trying to overpower my woman. It was hilarious. And I didn't take offense. You know, if Barry hadn't made a pass at her, he would have been crazy. Let's put it that way. But I mean, I didn't appreciate it. But at the same time, he had had plenty to drink, and he was not responsible for his actions exactly. But that's part of the community of writers. Mississippi is a crazy country. When you cross the line between Tennessee and Mississippi, you've entered berserk. It's not always easy to get along in Mississippi, but once you get to know the people, and you know, especially writers almost are forgiving. They almost never take offense. Why? Because they understand how hard it is to write. You're isolated. You're there in the room in front of your computer by yourself, and you've got to make it happen. And that's not easy. And they respect each other's sacrifice, and they respect each other's commitment and commitment to honesty and truth. So it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood. I'm not being gender prejudiced here. It's a brotherhood and sisterhood, and Oxford is I think like a living museum of writers. It's got that wonderful. It has a glow about it. It's easy to live here as long as you are respectful of your fellow writers, and you it's a beautiful community. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's definitely a great place to. I mean, we visited it and went to Faulkner's home there. This was
Roanoke.
years ago. Yeah, Roanoke, and there was definitely that sense of community, and there was that excitement around the bookstore.
Yeah.
Found as well. I wanted to ask you, what do you think Faulkner would make of everything that's going on today in the world? And you can decline to comment, but I'm just curious what you think he'd make of it all.
Well, Faulkner had a family of characters he called the Snopeses.
Right.
Beginning with the infamous Slim Snope, a kind of Mephistophelian character who is about greed, and the town has had a lot of real estate development and it's changed very much since he lived here. Many townhouses and apartment complexes. The old neighborhoods have changed architecturally. And the town itself has changed in that the downtown area has 18 bars. It wasn't that way. They didn't have any bars in Faulkner's time. Not that he wouldn't have liked, liked a bar or two, but I think that he would be probably both shocked at Oxford's changes, physical changes, but also he would have said, I predicted it. I knew this was going to happen. And it's, I think that he would be like a benevolent spirit for our writers community here. It's a literary town. He created that, he started it. But in his day, the townspeople called him Count No Count and the Corncob Man. And they reviled, many of them were embarrassed by his writings because he told the truth about Mississippi back then. And he was one of the first to do that. And they were not sure that they could, that Mississippi, which was toward the last and the bottom of everything that in education and industry, and they had a inferiority complex, and Faulkner had tapped into that insecurity, and so Faulkner didn't have the kind of, he turned on the town. He wouldn't attend functions. He wouldn't teach at Ole Miss. They invited him to teach. And when Willie Morris came here, the town lavished affection on him that Faulkner wouldn't receive. Willie was a happy recipient of all of that withheld emotion and friendship that Faulkner said, you know, I'm not going to forgive the town. And I don't think he ever did. He was very happy when he moved to Charlottesville, Virginia in 1956 to become the writer in residence there. And he spent the next 6 years of his life there, only returning to Oxford to tend to the house. So Faulkner would have had mixed feelings, let's put it that way, about the town. And he would have appreciated finer aspects and the community and the sociability. But as far as the town itself, he would have said, I was right all along. Blim Snopes came and he conquered.
Wow. Well, this has been great, Lawrence, to hear these stories and to give people a glimpse of the book. And so is the book available? It's called In Faulkner's Shadow, a memoir. Is that the title?
That's the title. And it's available at any independent bookstore. As you know, the wholesalers buy the books from the publishers and then sell them to the bookstores, and it's online for any bookstore to order. So that would be probably the best way to support your independent bookstore.
Okay. So it's available at independent bookstores, so your local bookstore.
Yeah.
That's great. And do you have a website we could tell people about?
Yeah, well,
Or the publisher?
For the publisher, you know, I own a small press.
Okay.
And the problem is the name is Yoknapatawpha Press, and nobody can spell it. But you take a stab at Yoknapatawpha, and
okay.
It's yoknapatawphapress.com.
Okay.
That word is like Faulkner's curse on the reading public.
Right, right.
It was his county, Yoknapatawpha County. Dean and I didn't start Yoknapatawpha Press. It was started by a friend of Faulkner's daughter, Jill, a businessman, and he started Yoknapatawpha Press, and we bought it from him and began publishing books. So that's my site, and people can get in touch with me through that.
Okay, terrific.
It's spelled Yoknapatawpha.
Well, I'll make sure the spelling's correct. But we'll put up, so what we'll do is we'll put up a link to the video interview for people. and
Yeah,
get that out probably today, and then we'll put up a link to your site as well.
yeah, great. That would be that's fun. Thank you. I appreciate it, Francis. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, this is great, and it's great to hear. And I've read most of the memoir, and it's great. And there's some good stories in there, so I think people will enjoy it, especially if they are passionate about Faulkner and the Southern writers. So
Okay, well, if you ever get back down this way, be sure to let me know.
definitely, will do.
Okay,
If anybody start traveling again, I know.
okay.
It's crazy. All right,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Lawrence.
All right.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.